Hello and welcome back to Left, Right and Centre, a podcast where we review political news in New Zealand from a range of different views from across the spectrum. My name is Ben Wiley Van Eerd and I'm here with
Dalsage
and
Wayne Parker.
And today we're going to be talking about the Riverlink Project, which is obviously a big piece of infrastructure, big piece of public works that's been talked about for a long time in the Hutt Valley, where we're all from. And as we record this podcast, there's just been a report that the cost is expected to go up. So what does this mean for Riverlink, and what does it mean in general for infrastructure projects around the country? Wayne, maybe we can go to you first.
Yeah, one of the things you find with infrastructure projects is the time between where they're costed and the time when they're delivered. It's an unknown time. So it could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years plus. And then what happens by the time it actually comes to be delivered? Inflation. So the prices go up. And then when you get to deliver, it always costs more. So that's one of the things when they cost, most of the costing's done at the time, as per effective, at the time when the paperwork's been drawn up. And this is something which has historically become a problem, because when it gets to the real time of delivery, the budget's always blown.
So do you know why we do our costings like that? Why don't we predict, a certain amount of inflation for the years into the future and build it in from the start?
What I think they should do is, I agree with you there, that what they should be doing is projecting how long it will be until the project starts, and then look at how much more cost will be involved. And this is where the budget blowouts always happen, because they're always out by the larger projects which go into the multi-millions, they're always out by 100 million plus, and then they don't actually have a formula to apply to that. And that's actually something which I've noticed government have across the board. I did some work with an organisation called the Zero Hunger Collective, and 3 budgets ago we advised that they must put up benefits. And we said, because we did a study and we showed that 87% of beneficiaries were $20 in the red every week. And so that means what they were getting, they couldn't just pay for their normal bills. So that wasn't if the car broke down, something like that. So the cost of living was more than what they were receiving. And so we says, if you don't put it up now, the system will break. So what was good is it's the first time in 30 years that they did increase that the benefits by $20. So it offset it, so it should have been zero. But by the time it got implemented, it was back down to negative $17 a week. So it was sort of...
I see what you're saying, right? Like by the time it happened, things have moved on again.
And I think it was it took about 7-8 months for them to put into place. So it had been put in the budget, then it was put into place. But in that short period of time, it had already been eaten up and had been lost with the price of inflation. So, it was sort of nullified the second it came in. And so if that happens in that scenario, I can see across the board what I think would be really effective, that they come up with costings for things, so they know how much the prices for events, for infrastructure is affected most likely in the future. You can't get it all right, but you just have to budget for it, otherwise this happens continuously. And then what happens, it gets in the media, and then opposition will say, oh well, this government's done this, and they're blowing the budget before it starts. And often it's been a change of government in that time, so then they start pointing fingers, well you're the guys that brought it in, and but you're the guys that are delivering, and it's just...
Yeah, I certainly know what you mean about people pointing fingers at each other. It seems like every time we have an election around here, it's our 2 wonderful local MPs who are doing a great job, but they do tend to point the finger at each other a lot during those events. Hey, Dallas, I want to bring you in here. What are your thoughts on like the cost increases around Riverlink?
Well, for me personally, I felt the most interesting thing was when the new Hutt MP, Chris Bishop, said that every part of the project now needed to be re-looked at. Basically meaning it almost seems like the project's going to go back to the very start, and it seems like they're going to gear up to do quite a bit of slashing towards the project and its initial cost. And I have to say, to a degree, I definitely agree that there should be a few things cut from the project. I think the fact that there were so many different organisations that were needing to be brought into this is what kind of made it messy from the start. You've got the Hutt Council, you've got Wakakatahi, and one big thing I didn't agree on with the project was the amount of money being put towards cycleways, for example. And especially the fact that there was going to be no exclusive footbridge, meaning pedestrians and cyclists all shared the same pathway. And I just think that the government keeps putting a lot of money towards pushing cycling as, the main reason of transportation. But I just don't think that's very realistic on the population that we have.
Well, you know my views on cycleways. I'm a proud Dutch heritage man myself, so I'm a big fan of bicycles. So you can blame my Dutch heritage if you want, but I honestly see the cycleways as quite an important part of the transportation angle. Maybe we should actually take a minute to explain for people who don't know what's involved in Riverlink actually, because it's quite a it's a few different things at once. So I think the origin of this project was the risk of flooding in the lower Hutt Valley. We've got the mighty Te Awa Kairangi running through our valley, beautiful river, people enjoy it quite a lot, but it can flood. It has historically flooded the region pretty badly, and I guess the original reason for doing the Riverlink project was to change the stop banks around the river as they currently are, to make it so that they're a little bit higher and there's a lower risk of flood, or rather that it will protect us against bigger floods. So that was the origin of it, and then people thought, while we're doing that, since we need to change the bridge over the Melling Interchange anyway, why don't we get a better roading solution around there? Because that has been a sort of a pain point for people in the area. It's a set of traffic lights. It's on State Highway 2. You're roaring down the motorway at 100 kilometres per hour, and then you get to this red light and you have to stop. It is quite annoying, eh?
You're not wrong.
Yeah. So there's that part of it. And then, as you say, Dallas, they've added the active transportation and the public transportation things around that as well. So that's what's involved in Riverlink.
Well, I know in 2020, for example, Cycling New Zealand put out the facts that in the Wellington region alone, we had about 30,000 people cycling every day, which was pretty good. But a lot of that, I feel, could be put down to the fact that we just come out of lockdowns and people probably wanted to get really active. Because if you compare those numbers to now, those numbers show we only have about 7,000 people in the Wellington region cycling every day, which is a huge drop-off from the 30,000, obviously. And I feel like to go and pour in that much money on 7,000 people, and that again is in the Wellington region, so that might not even be a large group in the Hutt. I feel like to put a lot of focus on these cycling paths for such a small percentage of the populace in the area, I feel like that just goes a bit towards some wasteful spending, when the primary goal should be on resilience.
I think I have to disagree with that point, and I'm a cycling fan too. If you go, I've lived in China, so this is a good example. And cycling in China is really big, because everybody's got a cycle, you know what I mean? And now if you look at their population, which is like 1.2 billion, and the city I was living in was Shanghai. So Shanghai is the most popular city in the world, it had 20 million in one city. And even though there was a lot of traffic in the main city there was still lots of people cycling, And with people cycling, it actually takes pressure off the infrastructure. And so this is where I think people haven't looked at the long-term plan, is they think, well, we've got a bigger population, therefore we should have more cars. And the problem with cars is the majority of cars that we've got in New Zealand, and this is one thing that I think the government did, the previous government did, was to look at bringing hybrid cars and e-cars in. I think that was a good idea, because the fact of the matter is, the fuel that we're using, it's got a finite end. So the amount of fuel that we're pulling out of the earth, that's not going to last forever. And the rate that we're using it, it's got a very finite period. So moving over to e-cars, I thought was a good idea. But the long-term sustainable idea is cycling, because that's one thing where forever you can use cycles and it doesn't have an impact on our environment that cars do, as far as pollution and also the infrastructure, the damage it takes on the road. So something a lot of people aren't aware of is that what they did is they changed the load on trucks on the road. So, and I'll explain the history behind this. So a lot of the trains were shut down in New Zealand. So trains can actually transport large amounts of goods, that we shop every day to purchase. Because the train infrastructure fell through, then what they had to do to offset that was increase the amount that trucks could use on the road. And it increased markedly. And so what effect that had is trucks were carrying a lot bigger load. So all you see now is people moaning about potholes. That's the problem where the potholes arose from. It's because the loads now are over virtually twice as much as what they used to be before, but they didn't think of the effect that it would have on the infrastructure. You see, so now our infrastructure is actually getting a lot more wear and tear because the trucks are carrying way more load than they used to. And I think the way that the previous government focused on trying to get trains back in use was a good idea because that would have taken less stress on our infrastructure. And so, I'm a big bike fan, and I think development of walking and cycling is good for the health, good for the environment, and it's actually good long-term sustainable for the infrastructure. We don't all need to have cars, but the more people that use bikes, the better it is, the less stress it takes on our infrastructure.
I'm just curious for the both of you then, especially in the middle of a cost of living crisis, how you can justify millions of dollars going towards cycling when the percentage in the Hutt Valley that do cycle is so small. When we could put that money towards trains, buses, modes of public transport that people actually use quite a bit.
Well, I guess what I'd say to that, like from a cost of living perspective, if you enable people to make journeys by bicycle that would have otherwise made by cars, those people are saving money, right? They're spending less money on fuel, they're spending less money on buying new cars and maintaining them, if you can make it like easy and practical for people. And that was basically my experience in the Netherlands, is that like transport cost me bugger all in the Netherlands because I mostly just cycled everywhere. It was cheap for a person to do that, but you have to have the public works that enable it.
Yeah.
And just in terms of this particular project, I think the reason that the cycling is quite important is that the more people you enable to easily transport from their houses to the Melling train station, where this like big public transport hub is going to be, that's people who don't need to take a car ride. But you have to, so it's this last mile problem. I'm not saying that people are going to be cycling all the way into Wellington. I know that you do get some pretty bold folks who do that, but keen on cycling as I am, I don't think that would be the way that I do things. But the short distance trip, just from the house to the train station, if you can make that safe and convenient, people save a lot of money. And I think that's probably worth it.
But then even with how big and blown out of proportion this project has gotten, what do you say to the people that would be out of the Melling train station for a year and a half? Because that was obviously going to get shut down during the length of the project. Yeah, so this is another issue. When I heard that they were going to shut down the Melling train station for a year and a half, I was thinking, oh my God, really? Yeah. That sounded really bad to me. I have to admit, I don't know all of the details around that and how they're going to go. But definitely a worry for me. I mean, I'd want to know what kind of bus replacements they were going to offer during that time as well. I mean, I know people complain about bus replacements, but I don't think they're that bad. Maybe that's a controversial view. What do you think about bus replacements, you guys?
Well, for that scenario, I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. Because if they're going to shut the station down for a year and a half, then how are people going to,
Oh, sure. But I mean, in general, if you come up to the train station and they're like, oh, buses replacing trains on this line, how does that make you feel?
I get annoyed because when you're on a bus, I'm a train person. I like a train because it's fast, it carries a lot of people, it has no impact on the infrastructure of the roading. So I'm a big train person and I use it every time I can. But when they're replaced by buses, that tends to eat into your timetable. The other thing too, which is I find really frustrating.
So you mean they take longer?
Yeah, it takes longer.
Okay.
But the other thing I find frustrating is that Transrail, Transmetro I should say, they don't take responsibility on letting the people who are catching the train know that, there's a bus on. So if you go to stations like Woburn, so I can walk to both Woburn and Waterloo Station. Okay, they're very close to my home. And if you go to Waterloo, they'll have someone on the microphone telling you, know, and they have these big digital signs up that let you know, so that's good. But if you go to a smaller train station, this has happened at Epuni and this has happened at Woburn,
okay.
they have this little sign there, but you have to see it, you know what I mean? So usually when you catch a train, people are looking, when's the train coming? And then, after it hasn't arrived, then they might realise, have a look at the sign and think, oh God, then, like at Woburn, you've got to get up and walk all the way over to where the train is.
Right.
And sometimes by the time you see it, there's only 2 minutes left, so then when you go and run to catch the bus, by the time you get there, so it's really frustrating.
That's really interesting. I haven't had that happen to me before, but that sounds terrible.
Well, it's happened to me before because I'm a big train catcher. You know, usually if I'm going into Wellington, I hate looking for a car park. I can't stand it. You know, and on weekdays there's a lot more traffic. So I just say, man, I'm just catching train and bus. I'm in and out, bam. You know, and I've got no problems with it. Unless I have to go to a number of places in the day, I'll take my car. But I'll just usually train, bus, and Uber if I have to between meetings, and it's just faster and it's quite cost effective. Uber makes things a lot more cost effective,
right.
You know, if there's no buses available, you know, en route.
Yeah.
But yeah.
When I was in Brisbane for a couple of months, you know, there was never an issue with the trains. It was never down. They always did the work during night when people weren't catching the trains. Every weekend, almost every weekend I would say, whenever I've gone to catch a train here in Wellington, there's always been a bus replacement because there's always something wrong on the weekends.
Yeah.
And I would argue that Malleen is probably the most important train station in the Hutt Valley, that and Waterloo. And a bus, for example, can fit maybe 60 people, 30 sitting, 30 standing. That's if they're all packed in there like sardines.
True.
Whereas a train can obviously fit hundreds of people. So I would wonder how many bus replacements they're going to have arranged for Malleen, and then that's assuming you're already relying on the buses, which are already quite unreliable with Metlink in the area. That's assuming then that you're going to have the drivers have maybe 3 buses there, like every 20 minutes or so, to make up for the train. So I just feel like it's blown quite out of proportion, and I do think they really need to kind of relook at how they're going to do it. But I also think that our local MP and the National Party need to be a bit more upfront on whether or not they're going to slash it or keep it going. Because just saying we need to look at every aspect is just delaying what I feel like is going to be the inevitable.
There's another problem too, that buses do a thing called piggybacking, right? So if there's 2 buses on to replace the train, they don't all stop at every stop. So one will take, you know, X, Y, Z, another one will take A, B, C, and they'll stop. And then some of the stops you get to, there's no room on the thing, so they're squashing people onto the bus. And I've actually seen them sometimes say, oh sorry, there's no more room on the bus. So you don't get that problem on the train, you know, because the train has so much capacity. But on the bus drivers can say no, and then the person's sitting there thinking, I've got to wait for the next bus now. I haven't seen it happen often, but I have seen it happen a couple of times. 3 times from memory I've seen it happen. So I was thinking, that's just stupid, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Alright, so definitely some problems with the bus replacements then, alright? You've convinced me.
Yeah.
I think the whole project just needs to be scoped down a bit more and just be a bit more realistic in the day and age that we have at the moment. You know, I think for the moment we should just focus on the resilience aspect, because that seems to be a big thing. You know, we were just hit with a hurricane maybe like a couple months ago or so here in the Hutt. Last year we had multiple floods with the Hutt River that ended up damaging quite a few cars in that riverbank car park. I think the main focus at the moment should just be resilience, and then when we have the money start focusing on cycleways and other more idealistic projects.
So I'm in two minds about this. On the one hand, I agree that that should definitely be the priority, but on the other hand, like, I know that with big projects like this, if you spread them out, it does increase the total cost. So, you know, I've got these two things on my mind, and, you know, I can't make a decision between those things, right? I'd have to have a full look through the spreadsheets. You know, you probably have to hire people to do this. I guess they probably have, but it's not something that I feel qualified to make a good decision on. Hey, I wanted to ask you both, like, what do you think about the Riverlink project in general? Like, before we talked about the cost increases, were you like, oh yeah, Riverlink, that's going to be awesome? Or were you like, sounds like a waste of time?
Well, for me personally, at least I'm in Wainui, so the cycleways, the train line, my work's in Lower Hutt, so none of that stuff was really affecting me.
Yeah, okay.
But I did really care about the resilience, because I've noticed a lot in the Hutt Valley that we've been pretty bad on our resilience planning. Especially out towards Stokes Valley, you shut down that road whenever there's big slips. You know, the Wainui Hill, for example, we have big slips coming down there whenever we've got bad weather. So I was really supportive of the fact that we were finally going to be doing quite a bit of much needed resilience work. I just think starting to see that the costs blow out, especially in the cost of living crisis, has just made me not feel very fond of the project. And I just wish that they would focus on the core aspects.
How about you, Wayne?
I think the ideology of the project was a good idea, but ideology and implementation are often poles apart. And then when you have the cost factor, which grows over the time before it actually gets delivered, that's one of those ongoing problems that I truly believe they should spend a lot of money focusing on a system or a department that is focused on future-proofing and future costing. Because if they did that, it would save the government billions of dollars in the future. And I've actually suggested it. I came up with an idea for once, and I said, look, things have got so far out of hand here. You've got people who've got lent up to $68,000 because they've had to.
Yeah.
And then I said to them, the fact of the matter, if you lend in that $68,000 at the rate that they have to pay it back, you'll never pay back. So it's actually a loss that you're incurring. So what we should do is we should spend money for all departments coming up with ways of figuring out costing and also cost adjustment based on that. And because like if you look at benefits, they don't adjust. And so 30 years until they had an increase because there's no adjustments. Every department should have cost adjustment factored in. All you need is a team, mathematicians to do it, put it in the software, and then people at once could just put it in and it'll calculate everything for you. They don't have to think about it. And if they did that, as an ex-mathematician, that's a simple way of saving billions in the future. And nobody's even thought of it. And I was just thinking, this is crazy. Yeah.
Well, I guess it was sort of time to get to final thoughts, is it? Yeah, okay, maybe we better get to that. I guess I think the main thing I'm thinking about when I think about Riverlink right now is what's the benefit-cost ratio going to be after these cost increases, right? Because I think responsible use of public money, it's got to show a positive benefit-cost ratio. We've got to be getting more value for the public than we are spending taxpayers' money. I think that's not a controversial thing to suggest. So I really want to see what that new number is going to be. And just more in general, we seem to be really bad at making infrastructure in this country, right? And I think it's something that we need to figure out why, and we need to figure out how to fix it really quickly, because in the next 30 years, there is so much infrastructure that we're going to have to build to leave a better future for our children.
For the infrastructure, I do agree with it, and I do believe it's coming up with cost cutting. Something to pick up on that LRC was about the slips we've had on the hills and the slips we've had around Stokes Valley. I think what needs to be factored into that as well as cost appropriate to time is also the effect that nature has. And a lot of people don't realise that we have had a whole lot more rainfall. And so because we've had a lot more rainfall, we've had a lot more slips. And so that's something that has to be factored into future costing. Because with more rainfall, we're going to have more flooding, we're going to have more slips. So we've got to have an infrastructure in place to take care of the more water, flooding, wind, temperature. And these are one of the things which I believe some of our parties in government have been quite blind towards. They've just thought, I don't really believe in, this temperature crisis. And then that arrogance and ignorance is actually costs our future. Yeah.
Dallas, final thoughts?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think we just need to get a better handle on how we're investing in our infrastructure. I think we need to start getting our priorities straight. But frankly, I just don't see that happening with the current government we've got. Not too sure if that'll happen with the next government either, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and on that hopeful note, this has been Left, Right and Centre, and we have been giving a range of views on the Riverlink project. See you next week.